Thank you for that introduction, Jeff. Thanks for having us. We're honored to be here. My name is Ken Langdon, and I am a solutions architect for Chef Software. I'm not. This isn't a product pitch. We're just going to talk about best practices for businesses to be successful. I'm speaking to the choir, I know, because everybody has the same goals as we do, and so we're just happy to kind of embed it further into your minds. So, and just a little bit about me. Who is Ken Langdon? I am a solutions architect, as I mentioned. I've been with Chef for just over a year. I graduated from the University of Oklahoma. I know we might have some folks that went to state. I love both schools. I probably spent more time in Stillwater than I ever did in Oklahoma City. And so just glad to be here and back in Oklahoma. I live in Texas now. So anyway, yeah, and Glue Kenny. So this is a real live newspaper clipping from when I was 19 months old. Apparently, I consumed a large quantity of glue, which explains the problems with me, I imagine. But anyway, so you can call me Glue Kenny if you want, or Chef Kenny. Chef Kenny works too. So, okay, just right out of the gate, I want to talk about how corporations are winning during this time of disruption and digital transformation. All of us, everybody is working hard. No one is asking you to work slower, right? Everybody has to work faster. And when companies do that, they outperform their peers and they make more money. They do better. Their customers like them more. You're delivering software faster. It's good for all parties involved. So when we talk about that digital transformation, because a lot of companies are not quite there yet, I would say, I think I've heard, maybe 10% of companies out there are really doing all those great things, and they're on the right side of this, where they're skyrocketing as far as their business value to their internal customers as well as their external customers. But there's three parts to this. So there's been some studies, some reports out, and this post-digital transformation is a technology factory capable of delivering incremental value rapidly and frequently across a large number of applications. Three different components to that. The technology factory, so incremental value. So we're talking agile principles where you have small bits of value that you're delivering across a pipeline, preferably, and you're doing it very rapidly, and that's via the pipeline. The pipeline is what makes that fast, right? And then a large number of applications. This isn't just onesie-twosies. You need to do it for everything. So we're talking about scale. We're talking about enterprise-grade kind of stuff. But getting there is really tough, isn't it? Because I know when I was a developer at Texas Instruments, there were about 50 people. We were in a very flat organization. I had one boss, and we did a lot of great work, but I didn't talk to anybody else across the hall. There was another team that was doing security work or whatever. They were scanning systems, doing whatever they did, but we didn't really converse with them. So everything was very siloed. So do people raise your hands for if you're still working a place kind of like that? I'm glad to see that not too many hands went up, so just a couple. So anyway, so there's all these cultural things that we need to do to get through that digital transformation. So those are things that are outside of my control. So that's out of software's control, right? You've got to that takes leadership. It takes people just speaking up, doing the right things, communicating within their companies. It's about communication is really the fundamental thing you need to do to get that to happen in your organizations. And then also we have a lot of technical debt, right? We've got all these old systems. We've got these hybrid environments where we've got some stuff that is kind of pinned on old operating systems. It's tied to infrastructure that's not supported anymore, but the application won't run in a modern operating system. There's tons of that out there. There's a lot of tech debt in that regard. And so that's another factor that kind of keeps us from getting through that digital transformation wall or period. Enter the coded enterprise, the things that we do have control over. Once we can break down those walls and we're doing all these great things, These are the things that are that we believe are kind of integral to becoming a coded enterprise. So we're an automation company, so number one, automate everything. Now, I've heard from a number of people, and I know a lot of people that do this, they download the software and they're playing with it and they say, man, this is really cool. But then they just experiment with it. They don't actually ever implement it, and they still stay in their same ways. They're logging into machines, installing software, and having to do it, multiple times. And this machine's different than this machine, whatever. Well, if you can code that and you can automate it, well, then it's repeatable, it's scalable. You don't make the same mistake twice. It's the better way to be. And so I would say you want to get away from that experimentation. Am I saying that right? And get to actually using automation. Code is the language of collaboration. Again, I'm speaking to the choir. Any code is versioned. It's a single source of truth. Everybody, once you have code, you can see it. Everybody who has access to that source code repository can see it and comment on it. And above and beyond that, while it's there, you're going to test every change. Now, one thing I want to say about testing, when I was a developer, I did my own unit testing, and I knew how my stuff worked, and then I would send it over, and there was another team that actually did all the testing. We really want to move that to the left. Everybody knows what I'm talking about when we talk about shifting left, right? We want to do everything on our machines and not over here right before we go to production. So test-driven development is a thing that I wasn't raised on, and so that's something. It's kind of developers hate commenting as well. We comments. There's a love-hate relationship with comments. So, but those are fundamentals, and so fundamentally, I want to write a test. Hey, is this port open on this machine? Write the test for it. Is this port open? Now write the code to say, make sure that this port is open. And so, from a configuration management standpoint, I've written my test to say, did I do the thing? Did I do it? And so that's part of, that's that testing iteration, right? And so you want to, and you're doing this on your local environment, you're able to iterate very quickly. You write a test, you write what the configuration state that you want that test to succeed on, right? Next thing is security and velocity reinforce each other. So again, going back to that shifting left, if we're able to take like a security policy and turn that into code, put that in a repository that a developer can download, and as part of that, there's tools that do this that will then apply that policy to the code that developer is coding, right? Well, if you're able to do that, now you can move faster, because a lot of times you're doing changes right before you go to production. That's where security happens, right? There's a change control procedure, and like right before you go to production, you got this big meeting, and then the security guy raises his hand. He goes, "Hey, does it do these 3 things?" And I'm like, well, if I would have known that over here, I wouldn't. We could have saved a lot of money, and we would already, we could be in production today. But no, I got to go back, and so I'm going to go back there. Well, if he put that into a repository that I had access to, and it was part of my repo, I'm like, pull that in, and I see it, and it's like he doesn't even need to look. He sees that, oh, this is Ken's stuff. I know that my policy is part of his code base. I don't even need to raise my hand. I don't need to stop this thing. And so you eliminate that friction, right? So everything kind of gets in there more quickly. That's part of that. Velocity and security should just be hand in hand. Apps, then infra. And I'm going to go to a little bit of this, and my buddy Justin, if you want to hand out some sheets just for later, I'm going to be going through this. So when we start talking about what really brings value to our businesses, is it the hardware? Is it the software we use to provision or anything like that? Is that really generating revenue for a company, generally, for the most part? Probably not, right? It's that customer-facing application or that internal application that you're using to do whatever you're going to do. That's where the value is, and that's where we want to be innovating. We don't want to be tied up doing all the things at the lower levels. We want to make sure that that app is at the forefront of our priorities, right? The application. Then let's marry the right infrastructure to that application, but let's make that application kind of the focal point of our thinking, and that's the highest priority. Narrowing the paths to production. So everybody's using pipelines, right? Who is not familiar with using a pipeline or does not use a pipeline to deliver their code to production? Couple hands. So if two things you can take from this talk, do everything as code, put it through a pipeline. Those two things, you do those things well, you'll be able to do things quickly with less risk at scale. You can do it, you will be able to do a lot of things very quickly. So in that same vein, we want to narrow those paths to production. We want to make sure that so we come up with a standard. You might have different pipelines, but as long as they're uniformly, you guys decide on, hey, this is kind of the path we need to take. Make sure those pipelines are consistent. And so if there's other teams that they're moving on to another team, and it's like, oh, that's the same pipe. I'm used to this pipeline. I know how to deliver my code. Then it makes everything easier and everybody's happier, right? And then the last thing, continuously create customer value at velocity. So if you do all those other things that we just kind of talked about, you're going to deliver value. And more importantly, you're going to be getting away from those mundane tasks of like anything you're doing day to day that's kind of taking you away from value added work. If you're just addressing problems or you're talking to an auditor because, hey, we've got this audit, we need you to go do some queries and pull, what is your app doing? All those things that are just keeping you from really innovating and adding value to your company. I live in this dream world where everybody in your company, including the guy that he works in payroll and he's a smart guy, but he's like a payroll guy, so he's not in IT. If he had access to the repository, he could, oh hey, I've got a great idea for our company's app. Let me create a branch and teach him how to get there, and then basically he can add some. It's like, wow, this kid really did some cool stuff. Let's merge this thing and get it in production. This is a great feature. If you had all those people in your company able to add that kind of value, you don't know what you're going to be able to create. I think that's the vision for the future. Like let's get there, and I think we are headed there. But there are, again, all those cultural things and everything that's kind of in the way. That's limiting and stopping us from getting there, right? So again, communicate, make IT fun. Let's get out there and be, as you can see in the middle here, this is kind of nice. You'll be a digital ass kicker, so forgive me. So this is kind of just driving it home. Collaboration through code is kind of what you want to do, everything in code. Collaboration through code is great because guess what? I don't speak English and I live on the other side of the world and I want to look at your repo. I can do, there's tools that I can translate that and I can contribute to that and I can see the code because the code is, it's the language that everybody speaks. I mean, everybody's got a tutorial, a book or whatever language. If you speak that language, then it doesn't matter where you live, what your speaking language is, you can do the thing. And so that's driving that home. And then businesses, like I said, just that dream that I have that the payroll guy is going to be in the source code, and as long as you have the proper gates, right? He's not going to put anything in production without you looking at it, right? So that's part of that pipeline that's going to make not only you work faster, but then allow people like him to innovate and help out your company. And so with that, this is my last slide here, but I was going to just really quickly. So everybody kind of got a little handout, right? And so when we talk about the coded enterprise, hey, and is it going to be better for me to close this laptop and get full screen on this, or how do you want to do that? I guess I didn't understand. Okay. All right. So just a visual on this thing. I need a headset. I'll go with blue. All right. So just kind of. I'm gonna abbreviate a little bit on this, so but just kind of drawing out. So when we're talking about that, do everything as code. Got an OS. So now there's a lot of tools out there, and again, just the opinion that we have. I don't really care what tools you use. I think our tools are really cool and they're awesome, and they do, and I think you should try them. But as long as you're doing all of these things in your stack as code, you're going to win. And so once we get past all that culture change and everything, so this is really the exercise for you guys. And I have a piece of paper. I don't want this piece of paper back. I want you to go back to your jobs, and I want you to write down all those things that you do have automated. Kind of use this as a worksheet, and for everybody at home, figure out if you're doing all this. So if you can put a little, if you can, provisioning. I heard somebody talking about using some stuff here. So I always do this. I'm like, if it's got a little antenna, that's automated. If it's a little guy that's not, he's got a sad face. So this is not automated, but I am doing some cool stuff with provisioning after I put a disk in the machine and mount an image and install OS or whatever, something crazy. Anyway, so all these, and then ideally, if I can try and draw a little laptop here. So everything starts right here. You want to make sure everything that goes from there goes to a source code management, so an SCM. You want to make sure whatever tool you use here, be it Git, GitHub, all that stuff, put it up into a place. Then you're going to run it through your pipeline. So this is your CI. ART, this is your artifact repository. So you're going to push this code up. It's going to go through your testing and all this stuff here. It's going to go into an artifact. So this should be an immutable artifact that you can then deploy anywhere, and you don't have to worry about it breaking something. And then we're going to get through your continuous delivery, and so ultimately to your production system. So this is just a real basic diagram, but you need to be thinking about not only on that worksheet what things are automated and what aren't. Do you have all these kind of things? So this is that single path, or that narrowing that path to production. Now there's other things too that you need to worry about. You got all these different ways. So secrets are a thing, right? None of you are storing any passwords here, are you? You ever see anybody put a password in a repo? Don't do that. Don't do that. So there are tools out there for secrets management. Yeah, that's an app. And so all these things, can you automate the installation of all these? Can you set up the Jenkins, the Concourse, whatever it is? Can you automate the deployment of that thing and get it up so that then this is all kind of done for you? I mean, the tools are there, and so I'll just throw it out there. So what else can we add to this mix? Am I missing anything? Do we have any details that you kind of want to add? What are you doing? Are you guys doing some cool stuff at your companies that I can probably just kind of write down as a note that all of us can learn? And then here, let me do this. I'm going on.
As far as our application deployment stuff goes, so every time any branch turns into an actual URL on a dev server through a Docker container. So everything spins up, deploys itself out there, so you can have multiple branches turn into its own URL, so it's easy testing and stuff like that. You don't have to go through manual deploy it or anything like that. So that's something we do is to that effect, is just these automated deployments to our dev system automatically become URLs, so you can just send individual URLs out. So you don't always have this static dev URL that people have to use.
That's cool. That's cool stuff. Anybody else?
So one of the things you talked about is the importance of having an immutable artifact. And one of the ways Docker reminded me of this. There's a lot of languages where that's not something built into the language. So like Java does have that. Like you're going to build a jar and deploy one or more jars and that kind of thing. And you're going to have an Artifactory or a Nexus or something to store that kind of stuff. Docker provides that for you in languages that don't have that. So if you're working with a language that doesn't have immutable artifacts built into the language's architecture, something like Docker where you're building an artifact that you can deploy across multiple environments is a good way to solve that problem.
Absolutely. How many people are using containers in their environments? Are you using them are they production, or are you still just kind of playing around with containers? Production? Awesome. Yeah, so all the different software architectures now that fit well in containers, and then you can get in and start talking about serverless and just everything that's kind of moving. Again, if you're doing all of this stuff, you can innovate with all these tools if you're doing all these things well, because what happens is everything below this right here is all risk mitigation. We do this because we have auditors and we work for companies that, PCI compliance, HIPAA compliance, all those different things. That's a very important thing in businesses. And so if we can, all those are things that are published. If it's a thing that's published and it can be repeated, it's like, okay, I can turn that into code. I can turn all that into code. And so we want to get all those repeatable things that we can codify, fix once, and forget it, right? You want to be, it's like, hey, I fixed that problem, and now everything works great. So, well, with that, I really don't have, that's kind of that's the coded enterprise. That's where you want to go if you're not doing that. Find me, you talk to people. In fact, go to Chef Community Slack, join our community and talk with us about it. Even if it's general DevOps talk, come on in. And there's a lot of people out there and we'd love to talk to you. Yep.
Sorry. I actually had a question for you. You talked about the importance of TDD, and that is pretty straightforward in application development. But the turnaround, there can be some real pain points in the turnaround lifecycle for TDD and things like provisioning with infrastructure as code and things like that. Do you have any recommendations for like speeding up that turnaround cycle or making that less painful?
Well, I guess when you're talking about the turnaround cycle, so what are those things that are slowing you down when you're doing that? Is it just the effort of writing the just doing the thing, or what is?
Like the time it takes to run the test can be like, if you're spinning up an environment, deploying things into it, if it's on the provisioning side, it can take a while. And then if your tests fail, then you're making an incremental change to fix that test and then having to wait the time for the provisioning to happen again. What are and that makes that TDD cycle really difficult. What's something you can do to kind of help that?
Yeah, so so you think about those testing scenarios, and just spinning up a local VM on my machine. So VirtualBox and VMware Fusion, you spin up VMs on your local machine. That takes time. There's some of that time that you can't take away because you've got these huge operating system images that you're installing stuff anyway. But yeah, so at Chef we have Test Kitchen, and there's a Vagrant driver that you can spin up stuff using Vagrant. That's might be a smaller footprint of an OS that to do a unit test or whatever, but ideally when you're getting to that where you're wanting to actually test as if it were in production, to create that immutable artifact, you want to be able to execute that test on the same hardware setup as what your production environment is, so that to help mitigate that problem with, hey, it worked on my laptop, but it doesn't work in production, so that we can mitigate that problem right out of the gate using that test stuff. Now we can provision, like when you're doing, there's drivers for cloud environments to more simulate what your production environments would be, and so we're talking about EC2 instances. Those take time, so you're really you're dependent on that cloud, right? So Azure, same kind of story. You can provision using our Test Kitchen. You can provision there, but the time it takes for it to spin it up. Of course, we're getting really, we're spoiled in that. I think the last time I spun up 19 different resources, using Terraform up in AWS, it was like 7 minutes. It's like, it's pretty quick, all things considered. So anyway, did I answer your question? You know, I mean, those are some stakes in the tent that are longer than others, and you're at the, you know, whatever the size of that data that's coming down to your machine and going back and forth. I mean, so you're talking about bandwidth and, you know, all those things that you don't have a lot control over all the time, right?
So like a unit test should be, you know, fast. You don't necessarily have to spin up a VM for it. And you run your integration tests in a different part of the life cycle than, you know, your TDD stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a good point. Yes, sir.
Just back to the unit testing and integration tests are different and the TDD. Not every company is starting from a point where we have a new product and we're going to start it this way with this tool chain that's fully DevOps compatible. Sometimes there are times when you would need integration tests to be your quote unquote unit tests so that you can go back and you can fit your application into that paradigm. With what you have, like, what have you seen people doing to get their application so that it fits into this paradigm whenever they haven't started off with a new project?
Well, you've got to start somewhere, right? And so, and when you talk about, you know, doing as far as unit testing and something locally here versus here, this, you know, you should have all of these pipelines. So you got to, this whole thing there should be a development version, you know, a staging, you know, and you know, you've got all your, you should be able to do this as part, that should part of be your end-to-end test, right? That you're going to actually do that integration testing. As far as if you've never, you know, you don't want to boil the ocean, you're getting started right here using, you know, doing everything just locally, spinning up a VM on your laptop using, and you know, and installing Git and doing, you just have to install that first tool, get used to using it, and, you know, slowly move up to the full blown, right? If you're just beginning.
Well, I was going to say on that, I've got a kind of weird dynamic that I've kind of got an environment where we have the same situation, but then we also have a greenfield because we're putting Angular on top of the same platform. And so what's interesting is that because that part of it's greenfield, we don't have a pipeline built yet for it. And so the team is able to build the scripts and build unit tests along with it. And I'm able to work with them, because this has never been done where I'm at before. So I built a Jenkins configuration as code and just spun up a Jenkins with all the packages installed and everything. So that way we're starting greenfield, and people can at least, if you make it visible and you start sharing it and getting the word out, get into people's sprints, get into their demos, and actually talk to them about generating that excitement to see what's possible. But then at some point you're going to have to, if it's a test that's, I just found this out literally the other day, if you have to kick off like an ALM script, right, to run that at the end of your cycle, that's in a dedicated environment. You can't, but the possibility of bringing that and shifting that test left is something that you need to have the conversation about. So go ahead and script it temporarily to say, hey, here's what could be done, here's how we automate the flow. But then over time you say, but I'm going to question, I think that you can validate this test earlier. How do we get that out of your running in a stage environment? And then that way you're freeing up those system resources, you know.
Excellent, excellent. Any other questions or comments? And would love to hear what else you're doing in your environments that you'd love to share about anything and everything.
So one of the things that we're doing is, like, when we're talking about things that can't be like integration or tested purely with like unit tests, so we do have a manual step in there where the developer has the ability to click a button and have that deployed to an environment. And that's where all the integration tests run and stuff like that. And the main goal of having the unit tests so separated from the integration tests is not really to like stop development and not give them like an endpoint for test-driven development to like complete, but so that everything runs fast. Like our unit tests run in like 12 seconds on our C# application. And there's no way a developer is going to wait 7 minutes for, in our case, like a Kubernetes cluster to spin up and have the container deployed in all those spots, and then run the integration tests on top of all of that. So like, typically I find that if you can't figure out how to unit test your application, there's something wrong in the design specs in the first place, or you have a lack of like creativity to be able to like visualize this problem without having to pull in a database or something like that. But yeah, the idea is that you just want to fail as fast as you can, as local as possible, so that it doesn't block up any other developers.
Excellent, excellent.
Okay, so totally correct, but everything you said is totally correct about application development. It's a completely different situation when you're doing infrastructure as code and configuration management. Because with infrastructure, let's say I'm writing a chef cookbook and I want to TDD that chef cookbook. That is not an application. And to test that cookbook, I have to stand up an infrastructure and make assertions against that infrastructure. And that's going to take time. And so anything we can do to speed up that test cycle and make it more unit testy is better. So anything you can do to have the infrastructure not tear itself down after you run the tests, if as possible, do basically hot deploy testing, anything like that that you can do is great. And I don't have a good set of best practices around that. I'm just curious if anyone else does, because that's a real pain point in infrastructure as code and configuration management testing.
Well said. Is there a rebuttal? No, I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. When we start thinking about, we're everything is code, and that was a good point. And then, related to that, standing it up and letting it exist for a while, that's a feature of Test Kitchen as well, that you can create then, and every change that you want to test, you just say, hey, converge this change, and so that heavy lifting has already kind of been done, and it's up and running, and then destroy it at whenever is appropriate.
Well, I'm going to say that's one of the advantages of writing declarative style, using declarative style tools that are get me from this state to this state. Because if those tools do that successfully, then the amount of changes you need to make, you don't need to tear down the world and then rebuild it every time you run your test cycles and things. So tools like Terraform, cookbooks that are written in declarative style, that's a really good practice for kind of doing some of that speeding up of those test cycles.
Absolutely. Well, gang, that is, I just am thankful that you guys had me here, and just excited to be back in Oklahoma, and just appreciate the time. And again, Ken Langdon and Justin Bowl is my partner, and we, 60% of Chef is not in Seattle. We're out and about in the world, and so we're in your neighborhood. We're friends. We just want to hang out. Of course, I'm a bigger geek than Justin, but no, we want to get to know all you. So anyway, thanks again for having me.